The Callahan Ranch had been in my family for 5 generations. My great-great-grandfather built the original homestead with his bare hands in 1897, and every generation since had added their own touch to the property. The weathered wooden sign at the entrance had been carved by my grandfather, the stone wall running along the eastern pasture laid by my father, and the renovated barn was my own contribution after I inherited the place 10 years ago. Every morning I would wake before dawn, make a cup of strong black coffee, and watch the sun rise over my 50 acres of Texas countryside. The property was not fancy by modern standards. The house was modest, the fencing practical rather than decorative, and my equipment was well used but meticulously maintained. What mattered was that it was mine, free and clear, with no mortgage and no one to answer to about how I chose to live on my own land. The first sign of trouble came on an ordinary Tuesday in April. I was repairing a section of fence when an unfamiliar black SUV slowed to a stop on the county road that ran past my property. A man in a button-down shirt and slacks stepped out, clipboard in hand, and began taking photographs of my front gate and the visible portions of my property. "Can I help you with something?" I called out, setting down my tools and walking toward him. He startled slightly, as if not expecting to be confronted. "Just documenting the neighborhood properties," he said with a practiced smile. "Have you received information about the new homeowners association that has been established for Willow Creek Estates?" I frowned, leaning against my fence post. "This is not Willow Creek Estates. This is Callahan Ranch. It has been called that since before your grandparents were born." The man consulted his clipboard with an apologetic shrug. "According to the county rezoning, this entire area falls under the Willow Creek Estates Development Plan now. All properties are subject to the new HOA guidelines. You should be receiving information in the mail soon." After he drove away, I dismissed the encounter. My property predated any modern development. Whatever paperwork games they were playing could not possibly affect a century-old ranch. I was wrong. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived, emblazoned with the gold-embossed logo of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Inside was a welcome letter, a 50-page rule book, and my first courtesy notice, highlighting violations already identified on my property. Unapproved fence color, agricultural equipment visible from the road, and non-compliant signage. What followed were weeks of increasingly intrusive visits. A woman named Victoria Masters, who introduced herself as the new HOA president, began making personal appearances. Her first visit seemed friendly enough. "We just want to help bring all properties up to community standards," she explained, standing at my gate in high heels completely impractical for the gravel road. "Property values are our primary concern." But with each visit, her tone grew more condescending, her demands more unreasonable. The rustic wooden sign my grandfather had carved was aesthetically inconsistent with community branding. My tractor, briefly parked near the road while I worked on a drainage issue, was unsightly equipment storage. Even the stone wall, a feature of the property for 40 years, was suddenly an unapproved structural modification. The final straw came in the form of a certified letter. Standing on my porch, I tore open the heavy envelope to find a formal notice regarding noncompliance with approved access point regulations. According to the document, my simple ranch gate needed to be replaced with an approved model within 30 days or I would face daily fines. As I looked up from the letter, I noticed 2 men with measuring tools examining my front gate from the road. They were taking photographs, making notes, and pointing toward my property as if I were not even there. In that moment, something changed inside me. The confusion gave way to a cold, clear determination. This was not just about a gate. This was about something much more fundamental, my right to exist as I always had on land that had been in my family for generations. The Willow Creek Estates Community Center was housed in what used to be the old Peterson farm. The rustic barn had been gutted and transformed into a sterile meeting space, with uncomfortable folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a projection screen. I slipped into a seat in the back row, nodding to a few familiar faces from neighboring properties who looked as out of place as I felt. Victoria Masters took her position at the podium precisely at 7 o'clock, not a blonde hair out of place despite the summer humidity. Her smile was practiced and perfect, never reaching her sharp blue eyes as she called the meeting to order. As we continue our neighborhood transformation journey, she began, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation, I want to celebrate some of our success stories. The screen filled with before and after photos. Properties I recognized had been stripped of their individual character, weathered wood painted uniform beige, unique gardens replaced with identical landscaping packages, quirky mailboxes swapped for approved models. Each revelation was met with polite applause from the front rows, filled with residents of the newer housing development that had sprung up on what used to be the old Williams property. And now, let us discuss properties requiring immediate attention, Victoria continued, clicking to a new slide. My stomach dropped as my own ranch appeared on screen, red circles highlighting supposed eyesores. My grandfather's sign, the equipment shed visible from one angle, the natural stone wall. Victoria did not mention my property by name, but her eyes locked with mine as she discussed agricultural activities inconsistent with our community aesthetic. After the meeting, an older man named Frank caught me in the parking lot. Do not take it personally, he said in a hushed tone, glancing around to ensure we were not overheard. The Thompsons had 20 acres on the east side. Their place had been there since the 60s. 6 months of harassment, 15,000 in fines, and they sold to a developer last spring. They cannot force me to sell, I responded. Frank gave me a sad smile. They forced out the Johnsons, the Wilkersons, and the Thompsons. Victoria used to work in real estate development before moving here. This is not her first rodeo. Over the next weeks, manila envelopes appeared with alarming regularity in my mailbox. Each contained new violations, increasingly trivial and always accompanied by photographs of my property taken from various angles. A tarp covering hay bales was improper storage. The rose bushes my mother had planted decades ago were non-approved vegetation. Even the gravel on my driveway was deemed non-compliant surfacing material. The most absurd violation arrived on a Tuesday morning, a $1,000 fine for unauthorized agricultural activity on my own property. Attached was a photograph of me feeding my horses in the pasture, as my family had done for generations. That evening, I spread all the notices across my kitchen table, sorting them chronologically. The pattern became clear. The violations started minor but escalated systematically. The photographs showed my property from different angles, some taken very early in the morning or late in the evening. Some were even taken from positions that would require the photographer to be standing on my property. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. My neighbor Alina stood on the porch, her expression serious. I thought you should see this, she said, handing me her phone. They posted it on the HOA social media page. The screen showed a map of the neighborhood with property lines outlined. Properties marked in green were in compliance. Those in yellow needed minor corrections. My property, the largest on the map, was marked in angry red with the label Priority Enforcement Zone. This is not about rules, Alina said quietly. Victoria has been talking to potential buyers. She has plans for this area, luxury homes, a golf course. Your ranch is in the way." I thanked Alina and returned to my kitchen table, staring at the pile of violations. The truth finally hit me like a physical blow. This was not a community organization enforcing reasonable standards. This was a tactical campaign to remove me from my land. My property was not viewed as a home to be improved, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. And someone had decided that my family ranch, my heritage, my home, had no place in their vision for the future. Rain pounded against the windows of my farmhouse as I made my 17th phone call of the day. The attorney on the other end of the line was the third I had consulted, and his answer was the same as the previous two. "The HOA appears to be operating within legal parameters," he explained, his voice barely audible over the storm. "As long as they can prove the annexation of your property into the development zone was properly filed with the county, their covenant enforcement powers are fairly extensive." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the stack of legal documents spread across my desk: property deeds, county records, and the ever-growing collection of HOA violations. Each flash revealed a new angle of my predicament, none of them favorable. "What about the fact that my property predates their organization by over a century?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Unfortunately, that alone does not exempt you. The previous owner—" "I am the previous owner," I interrupted. "My family has owned this land continuously since 1897. The attorney sighed. "That might give you some leverage regarding historical preservation claims, but frankly, fighting this will be expensive and time-consuming with no guarantee of success." As I hung up the phone, movement outside caught my attention. Through the rain-streaked window, I could make out several figures placing metal stakes along my driveway entrance. Grabbing my jacket, I rushed outside into the downpour. 3 men in rain gear were measuring and marking positions near my gate. A fourth person sat in an idling SUV, Victoria Masters, watching the proceedings from her dry vantage point. "What is happening here?" I demanded, rain soaking through my clothes immediately. One of the workers barely glanced up. "Surveying for the new security gate. HOA approved it last week." "Security gate on my private property." Now Victoria emerged from her vehicle, sheltered under a large black umbrella. "Not on your property," she corrected with a smug smile. "On the access easement, which falls under HOA jurisdiction according to the community plan." "You cannot block access to my own ranch," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. Victoria tilted her head, studying me like an interesting specimen. "No one is blocking access. All compliant residents will receive digital entry codes once the system is installed. Of course, properties with outstanding violations will have restricted access until those issues are resolved." She gestured toward my home with perfectly manicured nails, not bothering to hide her contempt. "The board has determined that your continued noncompliance requires escalated measures. The new gate system is being installed by Masters Security Solutions, a company with an excellent reputation for secure access management." My blood ran cold despite the warm summer rain. Masters Security Solutions. "Yes, my brother's company," she replied casually. "He offered the community an excellent rate." Before I could respond, she turned away, issuing instructions to the workers before retreating to her vehicle. They continued their work, ignoring my presence entirely, marking the spot where a barrier would soon stand between me and my own home. That night, after the rain had stopped, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by family photo albums. Images of 5 generations working this land stared back at me. My great-great-grandfather breaking ground for the original homestead, my grandmother standing proudly by the first tractor the family owned, my father teaching me to mend fences when I was barely tall enough to reach the wire. A formal notice had arrived that afternoon, informing me that during the system transition period, my access would be temporarily restricted until I had addressed all outstanding violations and paid accumulated fines that now totaled over $20,000. The financial burden alone threatened everything I had worked to maintain. My gaze drifted to a photograph of my father. He had been a quiet man, not given to confrontation but fiercely protective of our family legacy. "Sometimes," he once told me, "you have to stand your ground even when the odds are against you, especially then." Slowly, I closed the photo album. The sadness and confusion that had clouded my thinking for months was burning away, replaced by something harder and more focused. If Victoria Masters wanted a fight, she would get one, but not the kind she was expecting. I opened my laptop and began methodically researching. First, the HOA bylaws, reading every clause and subsection. Then county property records stretching back decades. Finally, information about electronic security gates, their installation requirements, operational protocols, and potential vulnerabilities. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I realized something important had changed. For months, I had been reacting to their moves, always defensive, always one step behind. That ended now. The victim was becoming the strategist, and Victoria Masters had no idea what was coming. My dining room table disappeared beneath stacks of highlighted documents, county records dating back to the 1800s, HOA bylaws with critical sections flagged in neon yellow, property maps showing easements and access rights, construction permits, environmental regulations. Each piece of paper represented a potential weapon in the battle for my ranch. I created a detailed timeline on a large corkboard. Every HOA contact, every violation notice, every interaction with Victoria or her representatives. Photographs documented each step of their encroachment, and recorded conversations filled digital folders on my computer. What had started as desperate defense was evolving into something more methodical. The twice-monthly HOA meetings became my intelligence-gathering operations. Instead of sitting in the back as I had before, I now positioned myself near the side exit where board members often gathered during breaks, speaking in lowered voices about matters not on the official agenda. "The Williams property will be listed next week," I overheard Victoria telling another board member during one such intermission. "Once we have that parcel secured, we will have completed the entire western expansion zone." "What about the holdout?" the other board member asked, not realizing I was within earshot. Victoria smirked. "The access control system installation begins next Monday. Once that is in place, maintaining an agricultural operation becomes nearly impossible. No farm equipment can pass through standard residential security gates. It is just a matter of time." I dutifully recorded this conversation in my growing file of evidence, along with the date, time, and witnesses present. My most valuable discovery came during a visit to the county records office. Buried in a dusty file of easement agreements was a crucial document from 1952. When the first county road was paved, my grandfather had granted a limited access easement with specific language. "This right-of-way is granted for the exclusive purpose of residential access and utility maintenance, and shall not restrict the Callahan family's unlimited agricultural access to their property." The document had been properly filed but apparently overlooked in the HOA's research. According to this binding agreement, No entity could legally restrict my agricultural equipment access, a direct contradiction to Victoria's security gate plan. My next step was building alliances. Elena had mentioned other homeowners facing similar pressures. I arranged to meet several of them at a coffee shop in the neighboring town, away from prying eyes. They cited me for having a vegetable garden visible from the street, said Michael, a retired teacher who had lived in his home for 30 years. Called it unauthorized agricultural activity in a residential zone. My father built our stone mailbox in 1978, added Ruth, an elderly woman whose hands trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee. They are demanding I replace it with their approved model or face daily fines. One by one, they shared their stories. Each case followed the same pattern, escalating violations, unreasonable demands, and steadily mounting financial pressure. By the end of our meeting, we had formed a coalition of 15 homeowners, all committed to documenting HOA overreach and preparing for collective action. My final piece of reconnaissance required technical expertise. Through a friend of a friend, I was introduced to Marcus, a retired security systems specialist who had worked for major corporations before opening his own consulting business. We met at my kitchen table, where I spread out the specifications for the planned security gate system that I had obtained through a public records request for the installation permit. Master Security Solutions, Marcus mused, studying the documents. Not exactly cutting edge. They are using the Gatekeeper 5000 model with standard remote access protocols. Is it secure? I asked. Marcus chuckled, his finger tapping a specific section of the technical specifications. Every electronic system has vulnerabilities if you know what to look for. This particular model uses a fairly basic RFID authentication system with a standard administrative override function. Administrative override. A backdoor for maintenance and emergency services, he explained. Required by fire code in most counties, the system needs to allow emergency vehicles access even during power failures or system malfunctions. So it could be bypassed. Marcus gave me a knowing smile. With the right equipment and codes, absolutely. The admin override is typically a set sequence of inputs that activates regardless of individual property access settings. That night after Marcus left, I sat at my computer until the early morning hours. My search history filled with research on property rights, HOA legal limitations, and security system overrides. A plan was forming, not just to defend my property, but to expose the HOA's systematic abuses and Victoria's personal conflicts of interest. The next day, I consulted with a specialized attorney recommended by one of my new allies, someone with experience in property rights disputes and HOA overreach. Unlike my previous legal consultations, this meeting had a very different tone. Based on the documentation you have gathered, the attorney said, reviewing my files with growing interest, we have multiple angles of attack. The historical easement alone creates a significant challenge to their access restriction plans. Add in the apparent conflict of interest with the security company, and we have leverage. What would you recommend? I asked. Continue gathering evidence, he advised. Document everything, but do not show your hand too early. Let them proceed with their plans while we prepare the legal countermeasures. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to allow your opponent to overcommit before revealing their vulnerability. As I drove home, the pieces of my counterattack were falling into place. Victoria Masters thought she was dealing with a simple rancher being slowly crushed under the weight of bureaucracy and fines. She had no idea that her prey had become the hunter, meticulously documenting every misstep and preparing a trap of my own design. The early morning light cast long shadows across my property as I installed the fourth security camera under the eaves of my barn. Each camera was carefully positioned to capture key areas: the front gate, the property line markers, and the approach road. All were legally installed on my own structures, their presence clearly disclosed by small posted notices as required by state law. "These are just for your personal security?" asked Alina, who had stopped by to help me with the installation. "Primarily," I replied, adjusting the angle slightly. "But they will also document any unauthorized entry onto my property. The footage is automatically backed up to secure cloud storage." This was just one part of my preparations. Over the past weeks, I had implemented a series of seemingly innocent property modifications, each serving a specific strategic purpose. I had repainted my equipment shed, choosing a color that complied with HOA standards, but more importantly, establishing a visible pattern of partial compliance to create a false sense of progress. County surveyors had visited twice at my request, officially remarking and documenting property boundaries and access points. Each visit was photographed and added to my growing collection of evidence. I had driven my tractor along specific routes daily, establishing clear patterns of agricultural use that would be visible in satellite imagery, and creating an irrefutable record of ongoing farm operations. I made sure to attend every HOA meeting, taking minimal notes and offering little resistance to new proposals. When Victoria announced the final approval of the gate installation, I merely nodded and remained silent, giving the impression of defeated acceptance. "The access control system will be installed beginning Monday," she had announced with barely concealed triumph. "All compliant residents will receive their digital access codes the following week. Properties with outstanding violations will need to resolve those issues before access is granted." Several board members glanced in my direction, clearly expecting an outburst. Instead, I simply made a note in my planner and asked no questions. Their confusion at my apparent surrender was evident, and exactly what I wanted. Back at my ranch, legal preparations proceeded in parallel with the physical ones. My attorney had prepared a comprehensive package of documents: affidavits from neighbors documenting HOA harassment, historical easement rights verification, and a detailed account of Victoria's apparent conflict of interest with Master Security Solutions. "These are ready to file," my attorney confirmed during our final meeting. "We have grounds for an emergency injunction based on the access restriction alone, plus additional claims for procedural violations and conflicts of interest." "Keep them ready but sealed," I instructed. "We wait until the gate is actually installed." The final phase of my plan required the most difficult performance: creating the appearance of withdrawal. Over several days, I ostentatiously loaded equipment and personal items into my truck and horse trailer. I made sure Victoria's regular surveillance drive-by coincided with me loading family photographs and boxes of clothes. The neighborhood grapevine worked exactly as expected. By evening, Alina texted me, "Everyone is saying you are giving up and moving out." Perfect. I did leave, but not permanently. I checked into a motel in the neighboring county, bringing only what I needed for a short stay, including my laptop, which allowed me to monitor my property through the security camera feeds. From my temporary base, I watched as construction vehicles arrived and began the gate installation exactly where I had anticipated. The workers moved with efficiency, digging post holes and laying electrical conduit for the sophisticated electronic gate system. A master security solutions van remained on site throughout the installation, its occupants occasionally consulting plans spread across the hood of their vehicle. They were installing the exact model Marcus had identified, with all its known vulnerabilities. On the third day of installation, Victoria arrived to inspect the progress. Through my remote camera feed, I watched her stroll along the newly installed fencing, gesturing emphatically to the workers. Her satisfaction was evident even without audio. This was her moment of victory, the final step in forcing me off my land. That evening, I received an official HOA email notification that the new security system would be activated at 8:00 a.m. the following morning. All approved residents would receive their digital access codes via email. Properties with unresolved compliance issues would need to contact the HOA office to discuss access arrangements. No code was provided for my property. I packed my truck carefully that night, not with the personal belongings everyone assumed I was taking away, but with everything I would need for the confrontation to come. The original easement documents, certified copies of property records, evidence of HOA violations, and the small electronic device Marcus had provided to interface with the gate system. As I fell asleep in the uncomfortable motel bed, I reviewed each step of my plan once more. Victoria Masters believed she had won. She believed her security gate would be the final pressure point forcing me to sell my family heritage. She had no idea that this gate, her supposed victory, was actually the trap I had been planning for weeks. My truck idled at the newly installed security gate, dust from the country road settling around the vehicle in the early morning light. The gate itself was an imposing structure, sleek black metal with the Willow Creek Estate's logo prominently displayed on each post. A digital keypad and intercom system stood on a pedestal to the left of the closed entrance. I had arrived deliberately early, positioning myself where my security cameras could capture the entire scene. According to the installation schedule, the system would be activated at 8:00 a.m. It was now 7:45 a.m., and I was the first to test the new barrier. At precisely 7:55 a.m., 3 black SUVs appeared on the road behind me. The lead vehicle parked directly behind my truck, while the others formed a semicircle around us. Victoria Masters emerged from the first SUV, flanked by 2 HOA board members. 4 more people exited the other vehicles. The full HOA Enforcement Committee assembled to witness my humiliation. "Good morning," Victoria called out, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction she did not bother to conceal. "I am surprised to see you here. We were under the impression you had vacated the property." "This is my home," I replied simply. 5 generations of my family have driven down this road without any gate blocking their way. Victoria straightened the lapel of her immaculate blazer. "Progress requires change. Willow Creek Estates has unanimously approved security measures to protect our community and property values." "And how will I access my own property?" I asked, already knowing the answer. One of the board members stepped forward, a tablet computer in hand. "According to our records, your property has 27 unresolved violations and outstanding fines totaling $24,650. Access codes will be provided once those matters are resolved." A small crowd was beginning to gather. Neighbors in passing cars slowed to watch the confrontation. Some even parked along the roadside, keeping a respectful distance but clearly interested in the unfolding drama. Victoria checked her watch. "The system activation should be complete now. If you would like to move your vehicle, We can demonstrate how the authorized access process works. I made no move to shift my truck. Instead, I stepped out and walked calmly to the rear, opening the toolbox secured in the bed. Victoria and her entourage watched with obvious curiosity as I retrieved a folder and a small electronic device. "Before you demonstrate your gate," I said, returning to stand beside the keypad, "I have some information that might interest everyone here." Victoria's expression hardened. "This is not the appropriate forum for discussing your violations. If you would like to schedule a compliance meeting—" "This is not about my supposed violations," I interrupted, my voice loud enough to carry to the growing audience. "This is about the legal validity of this entire gate." I held up the folder containing the certified historical documents. "This is the original access easement agreement from 1952, properly filed with the county. It specifically prohibits any restriction of agricultural access to my property. The installation of this gate directly violates legally binding easement rights that predate your HOA by over 60 years." Murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. Victoria's composed expression flickered briefly before she regained control. "Our legal team has reviewed all relevant easements," she said dismissively. "This gate does not prohibit access, it merely controls it. Now if you will excuse us." Without waiting for her to finish, I connected Marcus's device to the gate's external maintenance port, a small, inconspicuous panel on the control pedestal required by county fire code for emergency override access. "What do you think you are doing?" demanded one of the board members, stepping forward. "That is HOA property." I entered the override sequence Marcus had provided. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a series of lights on the keypad flashed green, and the gate began to slide open smoothly, its motors humming with expensive precision. The crowd gasped collectively, Victoria's face flushed with anger. "That is unauthorized access. You are tampering with private security equipment," she exclaimed. "Actually," I replied calmly, "I am exercising my legal right to unimpeded access as specified in binding easement agreements. But since we are discussing authorization, perhaps we should address who authorized Master Security Solutions to install this system." I retrieved a second document from my folder, public records of the HOA board meeting where the security contract was approved. "According to these minutes, you failed to disclose your relationship to the company before the vote. Your brother owns Masters Security Solutions, creating a clear conflict of interest that invalidates the entire contract." Cell phones appeared throughout the crowd, recording the confrontation. Victoria's composure was crumbling visibly now. "That relationship was not relevant to the decision," she insisted. "They provided the best bid." "They provided the only bid," I countered, producing copies of the HOA financial records I had legally obtained through a former board member. "No competing bids were solicited, in direct violation of your own procurement policies. Furthermore, the company was paid 20% above market rate for this system." The crowd had grown to include nearly 30 people now. Among them, I recognized many of the homeowners from our secret coalition meeting. On cue, several stepped forward, manila envelopes in hand. "I have similar documentation regarding my property," announced Michael, the retired teacher. "As do I," added Ruth, her voice stronger than I had ever heard it. Victoria's gaze darted between the open gate, the growing number of neighbors holding documentation folders, and her increasingly uncomfortable board members. The power dynamic was visibly shifting under the harsh Texas sun. "This is not the appropriate venue for these discussions," she attempted, her voice lacking its usual authority. "The proper channel is to submit complaints through the HOA office." "The appropriate venue," I interrupted firmly, "is the Emergency County Commissioners meeting scheduled for noon today, where my attorney will be presenting evidence of systemic HOA violations, including this illegal access restriction and your family's financial benefit from it." As if on cue, a news van from the local television station pulled up behind the gathered crowd. Someone had clearly made a call about the unfolding drama. Victoria Masters, for perhaps the first time since her arrival in our community, found herself completely speechless. The Willow Creek Estates Community Center had never been so crowded. Residents stood along the walls, sat in the aisles, and spilled out into the parking lot where speakers had been hastily set up to accommodate the overflow. The emergency HOA meeting had been called for 7:00 p.m., but people began arriving an hour early to secure seats. I stood at the podium facing the packed room, no longer alone in my fight. To my right, a projector displayed a comprehensive timeline detailing 3 years of systematic HOA overreach, not just against my property, but against dozens of others. "The documentation before you shows a clear pattern," I explained, gesturing to the screen where photographs, violation notices, and property records were organized chronologically. Targeted enforcement against specific properties, escalating fines for minor or non-existent violations, and consistent pressure to sell to preferred developers. Behind me, a line of homeowners waited, folders in hand, ready to share their own experiences. Michael was first, presenting evidence of selective enforcement. Ruth followed with documentation of arbitrary rule changes applied retroactively to her property. One by one, members of our coalition stepped forward, their individual complaints merging into an undeniable pattern of abuse. The evidence regarding the security gate proved most damning. County officials confirmed that the installation violated multiple easement agreements, while financial records clearly showed Victoria's failure to disclose her family connection to Masters Security Solutions. "In light of these revelations," announced the HOA vice president, looking distinctly uncomfortable, "the board has received Victoria Masters' resignation, effective immediately." A spontaneous round of applause erupted from the audience. Through the open doors, I could see workers already dismantling the gate that had been installed just 4 days earlier. The following weeks brought rapid changes. A reformatted HOA board, now including several members of our coalition, voted to roll back many of the most restrictive rules. The county commissioners launched an official investigation into the previous board's practices. Victoria Masters and her brother faced potential legal consequences for the undisclosed conflict of interest. Most importantly, a new community agreement was drafted, emphasizing property rights and establishing reasonable standards that respected the area's agricultural heritage. The document was ceremonially signed on my front porch, with neighbors and local officials in attendance. As summer turned to fall, the community began to heal. Properties once again reflected their owners' personal touches rather than conforming to rigid standards. Gardens flourished, unique mailboxes reappeared, and the neighborhood regained the character that had made it special for generations. One crisp October evening, I stood by my fence line watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and gold. The gate at the entrance to my property was a simple wooden structure once again, handcrafted using lumber from the original gate my grandfather had built. A car slowed as it passed, the driver waving warmly. I returned the gesture, recognizing Alina and her family out for an evening drive. Another neighbor walked by with his dog, pausing to chat about the weather and his plans for fall planting. This was what community truly meant, not uniform beige houses and standardized mailboxes, but people connected by respect for each other's rights and properties. My ranch stood preserved not just for my family legacy, but as a reminder that sometimes fighting back is necessary to protect what matters most. In standing up for my own home, I had helped restore the soul of our entire neighborhood. The battle had been difficult, but the victory belonged to everyone who had found the courage to join together against overreach and control. As darkness fell, I walked back toward my house, secure in the knowledge that the road to my ranch would remain open, just as it had been for 5 generations before me.